Hello and welcome to the Daily Journal's Capital View webcast. Where every week we talk with Daily Journal Capital Bureau Chief Bobby Harrison about the news that's going on in Jackson. Those regular viewers are used to seeing Brad Locke. Brad had to be out of the office this afternoon, so I am Chris Kiefer, multimedia editor for the Daily Journal, filling in for Brad. And we've got Bobby on the line. How you doing today, Bobby?
Hey, Chris, I was surprised to see you too. I
Yeah.
thought Brad had just cut his beard and looked completely different.
Yeah, well, we had to kind of help pad Brad's ego down a little bit and get him out of there. He's doing too many things right now.
Yeah.
Um, Bobby, I want to start off talking about a story that you had in Sunday's paper. About I guess, really kind of looking into the impact of the change that was passed in 2014 about drug testing being required for recipients of TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families, formerly known as the welfare program.
Right.
This is something that you've kind of been looking at that data for a while. Am I right about that?
Yeah, well, yeah, it took me a while to sort of get with the Department of Human Services for them to compile the data, but TANF, as it's called, that is what the welfare program morphed into in the mid 1990s under then President Bill Clinton. And the Mississippi legislature in 2014 required a drug testing component to apply for TANF. And under the way it would work is when you'd apply, you'd have to fill out a questionnaire, sort of a screening process. And based on that questionnaire, if it was determined that you could be a potential drug user, they could require you to have a drug test before being eligible for TANF. And if you you could be on TANF while you went through drug treatment. And in since August 14, when it was implemented, I think it was 307 people had been tested, Chris, and 17 had tested positive. But in total, I think 56 have been banned from being on TANF, and the 56 would include those who refused to take the drug test. It would be the 17 who flunked the drug test, and then the rest of them would be the people who did not submit to the drug test. Sure. And what's interesting, those 56, none of them have been through drug treatment. They all apparently refused drug treatment, and so that was an interesting fact I learned in that research.
And on that point, Bobby, the reason I guess that's a significant statistic, a significant figure is, and tell me if this is right, but from reading your story, I gather that when they proposed that change back in 2014, the reason that they cited for the drug testing for the TANF recipients was because it would lead to treatment for people who needed it. So the fact that even though, some people have tested positive and some have refused the test, the fact that nobody has taken treatment means that it really hasn't achieved its goal. Is that correct?
I mean, that would be, you could easily surmise that when the Republican leadership, that was one of the early things legislative Republican leadership did. And when they did it, they said they were doing it not as a punitive measure, but to help people to get treatment to ensure they were off drugs and to be more productive members of society and taxpayers and all that. And from that standpoint, it hasn't worked. I mean, first off, the opponents of the program would argue that very few people have tested positive, and then the ones and then the ones who have tested positive, they're not getting any help because for whatever reason they refuse drug treatment. And there's some question that I wasn't able to really get the answers to, Chris, about whether they say that the drug treatment would be paid by Medicaid, but there could be some instances where people who are applying for TANF would not be on Medicaid. So I mean, there's a number of questions about the program, and maybe those questions will be visited again during the 2017 legislative session. But TANF is a program that is for low-income people, and you may have the number in front of you, but it's a very little money. It's
let me I'll find that from your story. It's for families that include a child under the age of 18. For a family of two, the total monthly benefit they receive is $146, with an additional $24 for each additional child. The income threshold for a family of three is no more than $682 a month. or countable assets of $2,000 or less also.
Yeah, and another question I ask, which is if, because the program is really designed to help children, so if a mother, for instance, tested positive for drugs and didn't go through the drug test and lost her TANF benefits, what would happen to that child? And Medicaid and the Department of Human Services said there is a mechanism where where some paperwork was done, the TANF benefits could go to another member of the family to help that child, but not to the mother who was on drugs and refusing the treatment.
Mm-hmm. I guess the other maybe important thing to note here is, as far as the carrot to try to get people to do the drug testing, for people who fail the test and then would become ineligible for the benefits, if they submit to testing, then they can still receive benefits. Is that correct? I mean, not testing, sorry, treatment.
That's right. Well, if they undergo treatment, they can receive the benefits while they're undergoing the treatment.
Sure. So that's kind of designed to be the stick to try to get them to still undergo treatment. While this.
That's right.
And you can only receive benefits for 60 months.
That was part of welfare reform back in the 90s.
So I guess what the opponents of the drug testing then are saying, I saw you had a quote from Steve Holland, and I'm trying to remember the other legislator you talked to, right? And they both, their main point is that if the idea of this was to help people get treatment and people aren't getting treatment, and then you're also denying benefits from some people, that they say that it's missing its mark and almost becoming more what's the word, punitive, that Steve Holland used?
Right. He said it wasn't redemptive anymore, it was punitive.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think comes from this? Anything? Do you think that this might lead to some legislative discussions?
I don't know. I mean, it could. I mean, that could be something they look at as they look at budget issues. I mean, the program's not costing a lot of money. It's only costing $10,000 per year, and nobody's undergoing treatment. Then it's it's definitely not costing nearly as much money as it was anticipated. But apparently, they're paying a company $10,000 a year to administer the drug screening, and the test. So it's not a big budget item for the state, but it's definitely not getting the results that people said they wanted when they passed into law in 2014.
I guess besides the treatment, the fact that 17 have tested positive, and then you add another 39 who may or may not have been positive had they taken the test. Are those numbers? Do you have an idea for how they compare to what was anticipated? Did they expect that there would be a higher failure rate, a lower failure rate, or kind of hard to say?
It's hard to say. They at the time said that well, I mean, other states have had similar. I mean, that's done this. I mean, at the time it was pointed out that other states have done this that have similar low numbers of people testing positive. The argument of the leadership that when they put this into law would if it helps one person get off drugs and become a productive member of society, then it's worth the effort.
Sure. I guess moving to another topic that you had a couple of stories on last week is the issue of voter fraud, which of course has been more in the news from some comments by Donald Trump, the Republican candidate for president. I was looking for the word standard bearer, I guess is the word I was looking for. But anyway, the Republican candidate, has made comments, and of course it was a big issue during the debate last week as far as whether or not he would accept the results of the election, and whether indicating that maybe there could be some fraud going on if he didn't get elected. So you talked to Delbert Hosemann, the Mississippi Secretary of State, who said, that there's no reason to suspect fraud basically in Mississippi.
Right. He said that, there's been, the Secretary of State is sort of the chief election officer in the state, and he works with the circuit clerks and the election commissioners in each of the 82 counties. And they all pretty much seem to be on the same page that put in place that prevents any widespread fraud that could lead to election rigging or the stealing of an election. And they seem to discount it in Mississippi as it's discounted throughout the rest of the nation by election officials. It's both Republican and Democrat. It's important to note that Deborah Hostman is a Republican official, and I think a supporter of Donald Trump for president. So that's kind of interesting to note. And another factor is going on there, but there's another issue going on, Chris, along with the election fraud, and that is it would be difficult to from our election results are not online. Like when you go to the polls to vote on November 8th, there's not going to be anything online that you can go to change those vote tallies. Each county has its own election machines, and they sort of act as calculators, and it's not filed online. But what is online in the Secretary of State's office is the statewide voter roll. It has a long fancy name, but that's essentially what it is. And it has information like, when you sign up to register to vote, you give your address, your birthday, maybe the last 4 digits of your social security number, and some other information that could be of interest to somebody looking to do identity theft. And Secretary Hostman said that there has been efforts to hack into the, a lot of hacking's been going on in recent months, and there's been efforts to hack into the statewide voter rolls. That happens all the time in Mississippi, and he says they take safeguards to ensure that those efforts are not successful, and that effort is probably more tied to identity theft than it is to trying to sway the outcome of the election. But I guess what somebody could do is to hack into the voter rolls and take people off the voter rolls, and that way, could limit the number of people who could vote. I'm not saying that's happening or or is going to happen, but I mean that would be the genesis for somebody who is trying to influence the election results to go into the statewide voter registry. And so both you have the sort of the local level, I guess, where some people talk about people voting who aren't supposed to vote, and then on the more statewide level, you have people trying to hack into the voter rolls. But I mean, I think the important thing, I'll tell you a bunch of information, but I think the important thing to remember in all this is just about, it's a consensus of the people who deal with elections every day, both Republicans and Democrats, that there's not any widespread fraud that would result in an election being stolen or rigged in any way.
Sure, and obviously in the electoral college system, I mean, I would imagine every indication is that Mississippi is expected to go red again, and so assuming that happens, I wouldn't think that Donald Trump would have anything to complain about what that happened in Mississippi. Now, I guess if Mississippi didn't go red, then maybe there would be some questions asked.
Well, there's
history.
Yeah, given our history, but there's actually been a poll or two to come out that's showing the election is closer than expected in Mississippi. So, I think there was a poll that had it last week. I can't remember the exact number, but under 5 points. So that's kind of interesting.
So strike my last statement then. Didn't realize it was as close as that. You mentioned in the attempts, I guess, to stop the hacking into the voting system. Your story said from last week that there have been as many as 4,000 to 5,000 unsuccessful attempts in recent months. So I mean that kind of says the amount of activity.
Yeah, and that would be, I think that's kind of commonplace. That's what happens with banks and other places that store personal data, and it's just kind of an ongoing process by those institutions to there's steps way beyond my understanding that they take daily to ensure that such attempts to hack into those systems are unsuccessful. So, but apparently that is a sort of an ongoing process.
Yeah, sure.
That just kind of the era we live in with the internet, and the good things about the internet and the bad things.
Right. Always trying to stay one step ahead, I guess. Moving on, one more topic that you had, I guess we've talked about, on this webcast before, and that you've been writing about the last couple of weeks, is the big effort to update the state funding formula for public education. The MAEP formula, and as you've talked about before, they've both here and then on the Memo podcast. and written extensively about the effort of Ed Build that the legislative leadership, Philip Gunn, House Speaker, and Tate Reeves, the Lieutenant Governor, have hired to really kind of look at it and possibly change the formula. I guess your most recent article since the last webcast talked about Hob Bryan, state senator from Amory, who is the only remaining member of the legislature who was, is that right? He's the only person left from 1997 when they first
No,
put in
no, no.
MAP?
I'm sorry to interrupt you. But
Yeah.
I think you were heading direction anyway. But he was actually, I'd forgotten this until I went back and looked. He was the primary author of the MAP program in '97, and of the people who worked closely on the program in '97, he's the only remaining member. People like Billy McCoy, Gray Ferris, who was the Senate Education Committee chair from that at the time from Vicksburg. They've all left the legislature and gone on to do different things. But Hob Bryan's the only one remaining from that group, and he was concerned that at this time, to start this process of revamping the program, to offer suggestions for the 2017 legislature to revamp the program, to start at this particular time, it wouldn't give them much time to do to succeed in doing that, and to do it in a methodical, responsible manner. Brian pointed out that in '97, they'd actually been working on the program for 2 or 3 years by the time they passed '97, and one of his many concerns was the time crunch they would be working in if they tried to do something for the 2017 legislative session. But as I understand, Ed Bill is coming to the state this week to start the process to look at the MAP funding formula.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he says it was a 2-year process. Back when they put in MAEP, and you were covering that process. Is that right, Bobby?
I covered the end of it. That's correct.
Yeah. So I mean, just kind of, I guess, maybe along the lines of what he said, but kind of what do you remember about that process? And even kind of from what he's saying now, I mean, does this seem rushed compared to what they did back in '97?
Yeah, well, they at the time they hired a Colorado education consultants to sort of do what I guess Ed Build will be doing this time. I think it was I believe Ogden Blitt and I forget their names, but they worked. They were in the state for a long time. They worked with superintendents, a bunch of different groups. And it began in like '94, '95. People began to talk about the fact that, pardon me, Chris,
sure.
that the way the funding formula was set up in the state at the time, that property poor school districts were sort of being left behind and weren't getting the money they needed, particularly property poor school districts were not getting the money they needed to operate an adequate school system. And so they began to change the formula back in '94, '95, and it culminated in '97 with the passage of the MAEP. But superintendents worked on it, just a bunch of different groups worked on it, and it was in the '97 session. It was a very tedious process. It went on until the very end of the session. The deadlines were extended several times for the members to reach an agreement on exactly what they were going to do. It was a very time-consuming process, and I guess, and that's one of the questions about this rewrite attempt. It seems, at least on the surface, to be a rushed attempt to change the formula, and so we'll just see where it goes during the 2017 session.
Sure. So you mentioned Ed Build is in town now, and that I think your article said that there'll be some public hearings. Maybe that will be announced soon. Is that kind of
that's the point how Brian was making. This is all going to be done. A lot of it's going to be done. Around the holidays, and so that that calls into question, at least from his perspective, whether it's going to be a transparent and open process. People have different responsibilities during the holidays, and so it might be difficult to get the people who should be involved all together at that particular time. And he suggested, I think I forget the exact line of my story, but he suggested maybe they could do it during the halftime of the Ole Miss Mississippi State football game. But the way they're playing now, there may not be that many people at the game for to do it then. So right. Maybe that option may be off the table based on how they're playing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, it hadn't been a pretty season for either of them, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's about all we've got. Bobby, is there anything else that we hadn't covered yet that you wanted to touch on before we let you go?
No, we just had my wife and I with some friends just had a good weekend in New Orleans, Chris. So I'm feeling pretty good today.
Great American city. Great. Well, my hometown, of course, for those who don't know. But anyway, thanks everybody for joining us for another episode of Capitol View. And for those who joined in progress and missed it, it'll still be available on djournal.com and on our Facebook page. And have a great day. Thanks, Bobby.
Appreciate it, Chris.